Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The clock on my dashboard read 3:47 p.m. when I first noticed something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just off. Like when you're humming a song and hit the wrong note. That's small. That's subtle. But it was enough to make my hands tighten on the steering wheel as I drove down Route 49 outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. I'd driven this stretch of highway hundreds of times. Past the old Sinclair gas station with the faded dinosaur sign, past the billboard for Mabel's Diner that hadn't been updated since 1987, past the water tower with Class of 09 spray painted in blue. Everything exactly where it should be. Except I'd already seen that dead raccoon on the shoulder. Not just seen it. I'd counted the seconds until I'd pass it. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, there it was, right on cue. My throat felt dry. When had I seen it before? This morning? Yesterday? The memory slipped away like soap in the shower. Before we dive into what happened next, before I tell you about the hours that wouldn't end, I need you to understand something. I'm not the type of person who believes in the supernatural. I work IT support at a credit union. I troubleshoot printer errors and reset passwords. My biggest thrill most weeks is trying a new flavor at the Froyo place downtown. So when I tell you what happened on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon, just remember, I'm probably the last person who'd make something like this up. But first, if you're listening to this late at night, maybe grab something comforting, a glass of water, pull your blanket up a little higher. Because once this story really begins, well, let's just say you might not want to be alone in the dark. The story starts now. The first real wave of it hit me at exactly 4:12 p.m. I know because I'd been glancing at the clock every few minutes, trying to shake that weird feeling. I was pulling into the parking lot of Thompson's Hardware when it crashed over me like ice water. I knew that Mrs. Chen would be walking out with a bag of birdseed, that she'd be wearing her green raincoat even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky, that she'd wave at me with her left hand because her right would be holding the bag. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The automatic doors slid open. Mrs. Chen emerged. Green raincoat, birdseed. Left-handed wave. My hands were shaking as I turned off the engine. This wasn't possible. Deja vu lasted seconds, maybe a minute at most. It was just your brain misfiring, mixing up the present with stored memories. I'd read about it. Normal, explainable, scientific, but this was different. This was precise. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, then 10. Watching people come and go, and with each person, each car that pulled in. I felt it, that sick sensation of knowing what would happen before it did. The blue Toyota would park crooked. The teenager in the Nirvana shirt would drop his phone. The delivery truck would knock over the sandwich board sign. Each prediction played out perfectly. My phone buzzed. A text from my roommate Jake. "Hey, you picking up dinner? I'm thinking Chinese." I stared at the message. Had he texted me this before? The timestamp said 4:23 p.m., but I could swear. "Already ordered from Golden Dragon." I typed back, testing something. Your usual. 3 dots appeared immediately. "Dude, how'd you know I was craving orange chicken?" "Because you always crave orange chicken on Tuesdays." "Because we'd had this conversation before. Because..." I pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. When I opened them, the world looked normal again. Just a hardware store parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing supernatural, nothing wrong, just my brain being weird. I needed to get home. The drive back felt like swimming through honey, every turn, every stoplight. Every other driver moved in patterns I'd already seen. My neighbor would be mowing his lawn, in diagonal stripes today. The kids at the corner would be playing basketball, and the tall one would miss his shot. Mrs. Patterson would be walking her ancient poodle, and it would stop to pee on the Hendersons' mailbox. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my shirt was soaked with sweat. The déjà vu hadn't faded. If anything, it was getting stronger, clearer. I didn't just know what would happen next. I knew what would happen in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20. Jake would be on the couch playing Call of Duty. I walked through the front door. There he was, headset on, controller in hand. The TV showing a scoreboard that I'd already seen. "Yo," he called without looking back. "Food should be here in 20. You good for rent tomorrow? I can spot you if—" "I'm good," I interrupted, knowing exactly how that sentence would end. My voice sounded strange, hollow, like I was reading lines from a script I'd memorized. I went to my room and closed the door. Sat on my bed, tried to think. When had this started? The drive home from work? Earlier? I grabbed my laptop and searched prolonged déjà vu causes. The results were not comforting. Temporal lobe epilepsy, brain tumors, seizure disorders. A knock at my door. I knew it would be 3 short raps. Knew Jake would say, "Food's here, man. You coming?" I wasn't hungry. How could I eat when I knew exactly how everything would taste? But I followed him to the kitchen anyway, went through the motions. Orange chicken for him, sesame beef for me, fortune cookies that we'd crack open at exactly 5:47 p.m. "You're being weird," Jake said through a mouthful of rice. "Weirder than usual." I wanted to tell him, wanted to explain that I'd lived this moment before, that I knew he was about to drop sauce on his shirt, that the delivery guy had given us an extra egg roll by mistake, that his fortune would say, "Adventure awaits those who seek it," and mine would be blank. The sauce splattered on his shirt at 5:31 p.m., right on schedule. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing a napkin. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, my reflection looked tired. No, that wasn't right. It looked resigned, like someone who'd given up fighting. When did this start? The question echoed in my head. Think, before the drive home, before the hardware store. This morning, I'd woken up at... The memory slipped away again. Frustrating, like trying to remember a dream after coffee. I knew it was important, knew the answer was right there, but every time I reached for it, my phone buzzed. Mom calling. 5:44 p.m., 3 minutes early. No, right on time. I'd been looking at the clock wrong. "Hi, honey." Her voice was warm, familiar. "Just checking in. How was your day?" How was my day? I opened my mouth to answer and the words came out automatically. "Pretty normal, just tired. You know how Tuesdays are." We chatted for 12 minutes, every pause, every laugh, every, "Oh, that reminds me," perfectly timed. When she mentioned Dad's fishing trip, I mouthed along with her words. When she complained about her book club picking another mystery novel, I knew she'd suggest historical fiction instead. After we hung up, I sat on the bathroom floor. The tile was cold through my jeans. Real, solid, present. I pressed my hand against it, trying to anchor myself. The déjà vu wasn't fading, if anything. The horizon of recognition was expanding. I didn't just know the next few minutes anymore, I could feel the next hour. 2 hours. More. Jake knocked on the door. "Dude, you fall in?" "Just a minute," I called back. I knew what came next. We'd watch Netflix. He'd suggest The Office. We'd settle on Parks and Rec instead. We'd make it through 2.5 episodes before he'd remember he had a Zoom meeting with his study group. He'd take it in his room. I'd stay on the couch, and at exactly 7:23 p.m., something would happen. Something I couldn't quite see yet, like looking at headlights through fog. Bright but shapeless, important but unclear. I stood up, opened the door, followed the script. "Netflix?" Jake suggested. "Sure." "Office?" How about Parks and Rec? He shrugged. Works for me. We settled onto the couch. The episode started. Ron Swanson was about to say something about government inefficiency, but my eyes kept drifting to the clock. 6:51, 6:52, 6:53. Time moved like it was being poured through a funnel. Slow, deliberate, inevitable. At 7:09. Jake's phone buzzed. Study group reminder. At 7:11. He groaned and said he forgot. At 7:12. He grabbed his laptop and headed to his room. At 7:13. I was alone. The laugh track from the TV sounded hollow, mechanical. I muted it and sat in silence, waiting, watching the clock. 7:21, 7:22. My hands were clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. What was coming? Why couldn't I see it clearly? Everything else was crystal clear. But 7:23 was a void, a black hole in my prescience. 7:23. The doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I opened the door. Not because of the déjà vu. That part was still black, fuzzy, wrong. I knew because only one person still used our doorbell instead of texting that they were outside. Sarah Martinez stood on my porch. Her dark hair was shorter than I remembered. When had she cut it? We'd dated for 3 years, been broken up for 6 months. The kind of breakup where you promise to stay friends, but both know you're lying. Hi, David. She held up a cardboard box. I was cleaning out my closet and found some of your stuff. Thought I'd drop it off. This was wrong. This hadn't happened before. This was new. The déjà vu was screaming at me, telling me she shouldn't be here. Not now. Not at 7:23. Thanks, I heard myself say. My voice sounded normal. How was my voice so normal? You want to come in? No. Don't invite her in. Send her away. This is wrong. This is... Just for a minute. She stepped past me into the house. I can't stay long. The living room looked different with her in it. Smaller somehow, like she took up more space than physics should allow. She set the box on the coffee table and I saw my old college sweatshirt on top. A few books, a phone charger, the spare key I'd given her. How've you been? She asked. Her eyes scanned the room, taking inventory. The place looks the same. Good, yeah, same old. My responses felt automatic, pre-programmed, but underneath, the déjà vu was churning, agitated. This conversation was like playing a familiar song in the wrong key. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Still working at the credit union? Still teaching 4th grade? 3rd now. Got switched this year. When? When had she switched? I should remember that. Should remember everything about her. But the memories felt slippery, watercolored, like looking at a photo that's been left in the sun. Listen, David. She turned to face me fully. There's something I need to tell you, the real reason I came by. My chest tightened. The déjà vu was screaming now. Klaxons in my head, wrong, wrong, wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Not at 7:26 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. I've been having these dreams. She wouldn't meet my eyes. About you, about us. But they're not really dreams. They're memories. But memories of things that haven't happened yet. The room tilted. I gripped the arm of the couch. Started about a week ago. She continued. Little things at first. I'd dream about a conversation, then have it the next day, dream about a test, then take it. Every detail exactly right. And in all of them, you're there. Even when you shouldn't be. Even when it makes no sense. Sarah, I know how it sounds. She laughed, but it was sharp, brittle. Trust me, I've been to 3 doctors, had an MRI, blood work. They all say I'm fine, but I'm not fine. David, because yesterday I dreamed about today, about coming here, about this conversation, and in the dream. You already knew what I was going to say. The silence stretched between us like taffy. I could hear Jake's muffled voice from his room, the dishwasher humming in the kitchen, my own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. How long? Sarah asked quietly. How long have you been feeling it too? I wanted to lie, wanted to say I didn't know what she was talking about, but the words that came out were, since 3:47 this afternoon. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Mine started at 3:47 last Tuesday, exactly 1 week ago. A week. She'd been living like this for a week. The thought made me nauseous. Does it get better? I asked. Does it fade? Her silence was answer enough. I've been keeping a journal. She pulled out her phone, showed me the Notes app, pages and pages of time-stamped predictions. Trying to find a pattern, but it's getting harder to remember what's real and what hasn't happened yet. Sometimes I'll have entire conversations twice. Sometimes I'll respond to things people haven't said. What do we do? She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment, the déjà vu cleared like clouds parting. This moment, right now, was genuinely new, unscripted, ours. I don't know, she admitted, but in my dream, in the version of today I already lived, you had an idea, something about the time. 3:47, you said it meant something. 3:47. I rolled the numbers around in my head. March 47th didn't exist. Not a date, not a meaningful time, not... The memory hit me like a physical blow. Clear and sharp and impossible. 3:47 p.m. Last Tuesday. I'd been driving past Cedar Falls Community Hospital when the accident happened. Not to me, to someone else. A blue sedan running a red light. A collision at the intersection. I'd pulled over, called 911, tried to help, but that was impossible. Because last Tuesday I'd been in meetings all afternoon. I had emails to prove it. Calendar entries. Jake had made dinner that night and we'd watched the game. Except I could see it so clearly. The broken glass on the asphalt. The smell of radiator fluid. The woman in the blue sedan who kept saying she was sorry. That she'd seen the light turn green. Swore she'd seen it change. David? Sarah's voice sounded far away. You're scaring me. I blinked. The living room came back into focus. Sarah was gripping my arm, her nails digging in through my shirt. I think... My mouth was desert dry. I think something happened last Tuesday, something that maybe didn't happen, or happened differently, or... The doorbell rang. We both jumped. I looked at the clock. 7:41 p.m. I knew who it would be. The knowledge rose up like bile. Don't answer it, Sarah whispered. But I was already moving. Already opening the door. Already staring at the woman from the blue sedan. The one who maybe existed and maybe didn't. The one whose face I'd never forgotten and never remembered. She was wearing a hospital gown under a coat. Her feet were bare. Her eyes were wide and glassy and focused somewhere past my shoulder. You were there, she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming. At the intersection. You saw it happen. I don't know what you're talking about. The lie came out automatically. 3:47. She continued like I hadn't spoken. It's always 3:47, every loop, every time. But you're the only one who remembers. Why do you remember? Lady, I think you have the wrong house. She laughed, high and broken. Wrong house, wrong day, wrong timeline. But you remember, both of you remember. Her eyes found Sarah. Because you were there too, in the other car, the one that didn't stop in time. The world tilted again. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. That's impossible, Sarah said. I wasn't in any accident. I was at school, teaching. I have 30 witnesses. 29, the woman corrected. Timmy Chen was absent with strep throat. Just like every other loop. Just like every other version of last Tuesday. How did she know that? How could she possibly... We need to go back. The woman stepped forward, into my house, uninvited, unstoppable. to 347, to the intersection. We need to fix what went wrong. Nothing went wrong. I backed away, pulling Sarah with me. You need to leave, or I'm calling the police. She smiled, sad and knowing. Officer Martinez will arrive at 7:58. He'll take a statement. Find nothing wrong. Leave at 8:17. You'll go to bed at 11:43. Wake up at 6:15. And at 3:47 tomorrow afternoon. It starts all over again. How do you know that? Because I've lived it. 93 times now. 93 Tuesdays. Same conversations. Same Chinese food. Same episodes of Parks and Rec. Same accident that happened and didn't happen. Same loop that you're only just beginning to feel. 93 times. The number echoed in my head, made my knees weak. But this time is different, she continued. This time you remember. Both of you, that's never happened before. That means something. That means maybe... She swayed on her feet, caught herself on the doorframe. Maybe this time we can stop it, before 3:47 comes around again. I looked at Sarah. Her face was pale but determined. The same expression she'd worn when she'd decided to become a teacher despite her parents' objections. When she'd decided to leave her hometown. When she'd decided to leave me. What do you need us to do? Sarah asked. The woman smiled, a real smile this time. Tired but hopeful. Remember, she said. Remember what really happened. Both versions. All versions. Remember and choose. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Getting closer. The clock on the wall read 7:52. In 6 minutes, Officer Martinez would arrive. Just like she'd said. In 4 hours and 55 minutes, I'd go to bed. In 6 hours and 24 minutes, I'd wake up. And in 19 hours and 55 minutes, we need to go to the intersection. I heard myself say, tomorrow, before 3:47. We need to be there when it happens. The woman nodded. All three of us, the way it was supposed to be. The way it was, Sarah echoed. But even as I agreed, even as we made plans, exchanged numbers, set meeting times, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Some crucial detail that would explain why the déjà vu was getting stronger instead of weaker. Why I could now feel tomorrow stretching out before me. Predictable and unchangeable. Why I was starting to remember things that hadn't happened yet. And why, underneath it all, I was beginning to suspect that we weren't trying to stop the loop at all. We were completing it. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw moments that hadn't happened yet. Jake making coffee at 6:43, using the last of the milk, cursing quietly. The garbage truck rumbling down our street at 7:15, missing our house because Jake forgot to put the bins out. My phone buzzing at 8:22 with a text from Mom about Dad's doctor's appointment. Each future memory was crystal clear, like watching a movie I'd seen 100 times. But underneath them, older memories were surfacing, memories that contradicted everything I knew about last Tuesday. I remembered being at work, in the conference room. Greg from accounting droning on about quarterly reports. But I also remembered driving, windows down, radio playing that new Taylor Swift song, approaching the intersection by the hospital right as the light turned yellow. Both memories felt real, felt true, felt like me. By 5 a.m., I gave up pretending to sleep, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and tried to write down everything I remembered. Both versions. All versions. In one. I'd spent a normal Tuesday at work. Meetings, emails, the usual. In another. I'd left early with a migraine, driven home the long way to avoid traffic. In a third. Darker memory. I'd been in the intersection when the accident happened, seen the blue sedan run the red light, seen Sarah's white Honda get clipped and spin into the median, seen the woman, Emma, her name was Emma, stumble out of her car, blood running down her face, apologizing over and over, but that was impossible. Sarah and I had been broken up for 6 months. She had no reason to be at that intersection. Her school was across town. Her apartment was in the opposite direction. Unless my phone buzzed. Sarah. Can't sleep either? No, I typed back. Getting worse. I can see all the way to tomorrow night now. What happens tomorrow night? I closed my eyes, pushed forward through the fog of future memory, past the intersection, past 347, past whatever was waiting for us there. I don't know. It goes dark after sunset, like the film runs out. Mine too. David, I'm scared. So was I, but I typed. We'll figure it out. Meet you at the diner at noon? Mabel's? Yeah. Emma too? Emma. The woman from last night. The woman from the accident. The woman who'd lived this loop 93 times. If she shows up, she will. I can feel it. Can't you? I could, like pressure in my ears before a storm. The certainty that she'd walk through the diner door at 12:17, order black coffee and wheat toast, sit with perfect posture like someone who'd forgotten how to relax. The morning crawled by in predetermined moments. Jake's cursing, the missed garbage pickup, Mom's text. I moved through them like an actor who'd rehearsed too many times, hitting my marks, saying my lines, waiting for the real show to begin. At 11:45, I drove to Mabel's, the same road I'd taken, had taken, to the intersection, past the Sinclair station, past the billboard, past the water tower. Each landmark felt heavier than the last, weighted with significance I couldn't quite grasp. Sarah's Honda was already in the parking lot. She was in our old booth, the one by the window where we'd had our first date, our 100th date, our last date. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea, Earl Grey, 2 sugars, no milk. You look terrible, she said as I slid in across from her. Thanks, you too, she laughed, quiet and tired. Remember when we used to come here after your night shifts? You'd order pancakes and fall asleep in the syrup. You'd steal my bacon. You never ate it anyway. The easy familiarity hurt. 6 months of carefully maintained distance evaporating like it had never been. Like we'd never had that final fight about commitment and timing and all the small ways we'd grown apart. I've been remembering things, she said, about us. Things that didn't happen but feel like they did. Like that trip to Chicago we never took, the apartment we never moved into, the engagement ring you never bought. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. How did you know about the ring? She smiled, sad and knowing. Because in one of the memories, one of the timelines, you showed it to me. Here, in this booth, and I said yes. The bell above the door chimed. 12:17. Emma walked in. Same hospital gown under a different coat. Same bare feet. But her eyes were clearer today. Focused. Determined. She slid in next to Sarah. Ordered black coffee and wheat toast. Waited until the waitress was gone. It's getting worse, she said without preamble. The memories. The versions. I can feel them all pressing together, like too many photos stacked on top of each other. How many times have you really done this? I asked. 93. 94, maybe more. It's hard to keep track when every day is Tuesday. She pulled out a worn notebook, pages covered in tally marks. The first few loops. I thought I was going crazy, kept waking up in the hospital. Same day, same time, same accident that killed me but didn't. Killed you? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Emma nodded. The first time, the real time. I died at 3:52 p.m. 5 minutes after impact, internal bleeding. But then I woke up that morning like nothing happened. Lived the whole day again. Got in my car, ran the same red light, hit the same white Honda. She looked at Sarah. Hit you, every time, no matter what I did differently, no matter which route I took. At 3:47, we always ended up at that intersection. But I wasn't there, Sarah protested. I've never been in an accident. I was at school. Were you? Emma pulled out her phone, showed us a photo, a news article. 3-car collision at Cedar Falls Community Hospital. 2 fatalities, 1 survivor in critical condition. The date on the article was last Tuesday, but the photos were wrong. That wasn't Sarah's Honda, wasn't Emma's sedan, wasn't the intersection I remembered, or was it? My head spun, memories colliding like tectonic plates. In one, I'd been the survivor. In another, I'd been the first responder. In a third, I'd caused the accident. Each version equally real, equally true, equally impossible. What about me? I asked. Where was I? Emma's expression darkened. That's the part I don't understand. You're in every version, every timeline, sometimes in a car, sometimes on foot, sometimes just watching. But always there, always at 3:47. Maybe that's the key, Sarah said slowly. Maybe David is the constant, the thing that connects all the timelines. Or the thing that broke them, Emma countered. What if the loop isn't about the accident? What if it's about him? They both looked at me, waiting, but I had no answers, just more questions, more fragments of memory that didn't fit together. The waitress brought Emma's order. We sat in silence, watching the clock. 12:34, 3 hours and 13 minutes until 3:47. We need a plan, Sarah finally said. We can't just show up at the intersection and hope for the best. Why not? Emma laughed, bitter. That's what I've been doing for 93 loops, maybe 94 times the charm. Or maybe, I said slowly, an idea forming. We've been thinking about this wrong. What if the loop isn't something to escape? What if it's something to complete? They both stared at me. Think about it. Every loop. Emma dies but doesn't. Sarah gets hit but wasn't there. I'm everywhere and nowhere. What if we're scattered across timelines? What if the loop is trying to put us back together? That's insane, Sarah said. Is it? Is it any more insane than living the same Tuesday over and over? Than remembering things that happened and didn't happen? Emma was nodding slowly. The memories are getting stronger, more detailed, like they're converging. So what do we do? Sarah asked. I looked at the clock. 12:41. 3 hours and 6 minutes. We go to the intersection, all 3 of us, together, and we choose. Choose what? I met her eyes, saw my own fear reflected there, my own desperate hope. Which timeline we want to be real. The diner felt smaller suddenly, cramped, like the walls were pressing in, or maybe it was just the weight of future memory, the pressure of knowing what came next. We'd finish our coffee, leave a 20 on the table, drive separate cars to the intersection, park in specific spots I could already see, wait as the minutes ticked down, and at 3:47, we'd find out if I was right, or if we were trapped forever in a Tuesday that wouldn't end. Emma reached across the table, took both our hands. Her skin was ice cold. Whatever happens, she said, whatever we choose, promise me you'll remember. All of it. Even the parts that don't make sense, even the parts that hurt. Why? Sarah asked. Emma smiled, sad and fierce and beautiful. Because someone should. Someone should remember all the Tuesdays that never were. All the versions of us that tried and failed and tried again. Someone should know we existed, even if we never really did. I squeezed her hand. We'll remember. The clock ticked forward. 12:45. 3 hours and 2 minutes until the intersection. 3 hours and 2 minutes until we found out which version of reality would win. 3 hours and 2 minutes until Tuesday either ended or began again. The intersection looked different in daylight. Ordinary. Just 4 lanes of asphalt meeting at right angles. Traffic lights swaying slightly in the October wind. The hospital looming to the east. A strip mall to the west. Nothing special. Nothing cursed. Nothing that suggested this piece of road had been bending time around itself for 93 Tuesdays. I parked on the northwest corner, right where the memory said I should. Sarah took the southeast, Emma the northeast. We formed a triangle around the intersection, waiting. 3:41. I could see Sarah in her car, hands gripping the wheel. I could see Emma, still in her hospital gown, standing on the sidewalk like she'd forgotten what cars were for. The déjà vu was crushing now, not just knowing what would happen, but feeling it in my bones. Multiple versions playing simultaneously. In one, Emma's sedan came speeding from the north. In another, Sarah's Honda ran the light from the east. In a third, my own car was the one that couldn't stop in time. 3:43. Traffic flowed normally. A red pickup, a minivan full of kids, a delivery truck with a broken taillight. None of them knew they were driving through a temporal anomaly. None of them felt the weight of repeated Tuesdays pressing down. My phone buzzed. Sarah. Something's wrong. I can see myself. Other versions. All trying to be here at once. I looked closer. She was right. The air around her car was shimmering, like heat waves off summer asphalt. But wrong. I could see multiple Sarahs, one checking her mirrors, one crying, one laughing at something on her phone, all occupying the same space. Emma was fracturing too. Standing, sitting, running, frozen. 100 Emmas in 100 states of being. And me? I looked in my rearview mirror and nearly screamed. My reflection was a kaleidoscope. Different ages, different expressions, different choices written across faces that were and weren't mine. 3:45. The world was holding its breath. Even the wind had stopped. The traffic lights seemed to pulse in slow motion. Red, yellow, green, the colors bleeding together. Another text from Sarah. I remember everything. The engagement, the breakup, the wedding we never had, the accident, not being in the accident. David, what's happening to us? I wanted to answer. Wanted to tell her it would be okay. But I was drowning in my own memories. Every version of Tuesday crashing together. I was 25 and 30 and 32. I was single and married and divorced. I was saving Emma's life and watching her die and causing her death. 3:46. 1 minute. The shimmer was spreading. The intersection itself was fracturing. I could see ghostly impressions of accidents that had and hadn't happened. Metal crunching, glass shattering. But also nothing. Just normal traffic flowing through a normal intersection on a normal Tuesday. Emma was walking toward the center of the intersection. All her versions moving in unison, converging. She stopped directly under the traffic light, looked up at it like it held answers. Now! Her voice carried impossibly far. Choose now, before we split apart completely. Choose. But choose what? Which reality? Which timeline? Which version of ourselves? The clock on my dashboard clicked forward. 3:47. Time stopped. No, that's not right. Time shattered, like a mirror hitting concrete, each fragment showing a different reflection. In one, Emma's blue sedan plowed through the red light. Metal met metal in a symphony of destruction. In another, Sarah swerved to avoid a cat, spun into the median, flipped twice. In a third, I was the one who couldn't stop. Brakes failing, horn blaring, helpless. But in between the crashes, in the spaces where realities overlapped, I saw something else, the truth, the real memory that all the others were trying to hide. There had been no accident. Not last Tuesday, not 93 Tuesdays ago, not ever. What there had been was a choice. Right here, at this intersection, the three of us standing exactly where we stood now, but not in cars, on foot. Together, the memory crystallized, sharp and painful and real. Sarah and I hadn't been broken up for 6 months. We'd been married for 2 years, happy, trying for a baby, living in that apartment she remembered but didn't remember. Emma wasn't a stranger. She was Sarah's sister, had been, would be, was, and last Tuesday, real last Tuesday, we'd stood at this intersection waiting to cross. On our way to the hospital, Sarah had taken a pregnancy test that morning. Positive. We were going to confirm it, make it real, start our future. The walk signal had turned. We'd stepped into the crosswalk, all three of us, holding hands, laughing about baby names and nursery colors. The drunk driver had come out of nowhere, running the red at 70 miles per hour. No time to dodge, no time to scream, just the sudden realization that everything was about to end. But in that split second, that moment between life and death, something had happened. The world had stuttered, like reality itself rejecting what was about to occur. And instead of one timeline where we all died, it had split into dozens, hundreds, each one trying to save us in a different way. In some, Emma died but we lived. In others, Sarah was alone in a car that got clipped but survived. In others, I was the only witness, watching strangers die instead of my family. The loop wasn't a curse, it was a kindness. Reality trying to find a version where we all survived, where the drunk driver missed, where we'd taken a different route, where we'd left 5 minutes later or earlier. But we'd been split across too many timelines, scattered, lost, and now, after 93 attempts, we were finally back together, finally remembering, finally able to choose. Oh God, Sarah's voice. Real Sarah, my wife, standing next to me in the intersection. The baby, in some timelines, the baby is fine, Emma finished, her hand finding Sarah's. In some timelines, she's fine. Beautiful, looks just like you. She, a daughter, in some timelines. We had a daughter. But not in all of them, I said, the weight of it crushing. We can't save everyone, every version, can we? Emma shook her head. The split is too deep. We have to choose one timeline. Let the others go, except that in the version we choose, some things will be lost. How do we decide? Sarah was crying. How do we choose which version of us gets to be real? I looked around the intersection. The fractures were getting worse. I could see hundreds of versions of this moment. In some, we were having this conversation. In others, we were dying. In still others, we'd never met at all, never loved, never lost, never stood at this crossroads between realities. Maybe, I said slowly, we don't choose the past. Maybe we choose the future. They both looked at me. Every timeline we've seen, they all lead here, to this moment, this choice. What if that's the point? What if we're not supposed to pick which past was real, but which future we want? A future where we all remember, Sarah said. Where we know what we lost, what we could have had, but also what we survived, Emma added. What we fought through, what brought us together. The fractures were pulsing now, all the timelines converging, pressing in, demanding resolution. I took Sarah's hand. She took Emma's. Emma took mine. We stood in a circle in the center of the intersection. 3 people who were strangers and family and everything in between. "On 3?" I asked. They nodded. 1. The light turned red. In all timelines, all versions, every possible permutation of this moment. The light was red. 2. The drunk driver's car appeared, speeding toward us, but also not, also swerving away, also never existing at all. Schrodinger's collision. Every possibility superimposed. 3. We chose. Not a timeline, not a past, but a truth. We had been here, we had faced this, we had been scattered and lost and found each other again. All of it was real. All of it mattered. All of it was us. The world snapped back together like a rubber band. I was standing on the sidewalk, alone. The intersection was just an intersection. Traffic flowing normally, no sign of Sarah or Emma, no evidence of temporal fractures or repeated Tuesdays. I checked my phone. 3:48 p.m. Tuesday, October 15th. My contacts list showed no Sarah Martinez, no Emma, just the usual collection of coworkers and acquaintances. My camera roll had no pictures of a wedding. My apartment key was the only one on my ring. This timeline, I was alone, had been alone, would be alone. But I remembered God. I remembered everything, every version, every possibility, every Tuesday that had and hadn't been. I stood there for 10 minutes, 20, waiting to see if the loop would start again. If reality would stutter and fracture and give me another chance. It didn't. This was the timeline we'd chosen, the one where the drunk driver had missed, where there'd been no accident, no death, no marriage to lose because there'd never been one to begin with. The safest choice, the loneliest choice, the only choice that saved everyone by ensuring we'd never been together to lose. I turned to go, and stopped. There was a coffee shop across from the intersection. Temporal Grounds, cute name, new. Definitely hadn't been there last Tuesday. Any Tuesday. Through the window, I could see her, Sarah, different haircut, same eyes, sitting alone with a book and a cup of tea. Earl Grey, probably. 2 sugars, no milk. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text just said, "She's waiting for you. We both are. E." I looked back at the coffee shop. Sarah was looking up now, through the window, directly at me. A small smile on her face, recognition in her eyes. Not the same Sarah. Not my wife. Not the mother of a child who existed in other timelines, but still Sarah. Still real. Still possible. The intersection was just an intersection, but we were more than just one version of ourselves. We were every choice we'd made and unmade, every path we'd walked and abandoned, every Tuesday we'd lived and relived. I crossed the street, pushed open the coffee shop door. A bell chimed, exactly like the one at Mabel's. "Hi," Sarah said. "I'm Sarah. This is my sister Emma." She gestured to the barista behind the counter, the one with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too many Tuesdays. "We've been waiting for you." "David," I said, like she didn't know, like we were meeting for the first time, which, in this timeline, we were. "Sorry, I'm late. I got a bit turned around." "That's okay." Sarah's smile widened. "Sometimes it takes a while to find where you're supposed to be." I sat down across from her. Emma brought me coffee without asking how I took it. Black. 1 sugar, perfect. Outside. Traffic continued through the intersection. Normal. Mundane. Unaware that reality had broken and healed around that patch of asphalt. "So," Sarah said, closing her book, a collection of short stories about time travel. "Of course. Tell me about yourself. I have a feeling we have a lot to talk about." I smiled, took a sip of coffee, felt the weight of infinite Tuesdays finally, beginning to lift. "Well," I said, "it's kind of a long story." The bell above the door chimed again. New customers. Life moving forward. Tuesday afternoon becoming Tuesday evening becoming Wednesday morning. Linear, sequential. The way time was supposed to flow. But I remembered, we all remembered. And in that remembering, all those other timelines lived on. Every choice, every possibility, every version of us that had been and could be. The déjà vu was fading now, retreating like a tide. But it left something behind. A certainty, a knowledge that some connections transcend timelines. Some people are meant to find each other, even if it takes 93 Tuesdays and a fractured reality to make it happen. "I've got time," Sarah said. Her hand found mine across the table. Warm, real, present. All the time in the world, and for the first time in what felt like forever. I believed her. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 4:15 p.m. Tuesday, October 15th. A new timeline, a new chance, a new story beginning where all the others had ended and started and looped back on themselves. I squeezed her hand and began to tell her about the déjà vu that lasted for hours, about the intersection that broke time, about the choice that saved us all by accepting that not everyone could be saved, about the Tuesday that never ended until it finally, impossibly, did. She listened. Both of them did. Like they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear it. Like they already knew but needed it spoken aloud to make it real. And maybe they did know. Maybe in their dreams. They remembered too. Maybe that's what had drawn them to this coffee shop. This intersection, this moment. Maybe some stories are too big for just one timeline. Maybe some connections are too strong for reality to break. Maybe, just maybe, we'd found our way back to each other after all. The bell chimed again. More customers. More life. More moments moving forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. I was still talking, still sharing our impossible story, when Sarah interrupted with a question that made my heart stop. "These memories you have," she said slowly, "of other timelines, other versions of us. In any of them, did we have a daughter?" I met her eyes, saw the hope there, the recognition, the remembering. "Yes," I whispered. "In some of them, we did." She smiled, sad and beautiful and infinite. "I dream about her sometimes. A little girl with your eyes and my stubbornness. Is that crazy?" "No," Emma said from behind the counter. "Not crazy at all, just displaced. Like an echo from a room that doesn't exist anymore." "But could exist again," Sarah said, not a question. A statement, a promise, a choice. The future stretched out before us. Unknown, unscripted, undetermined. Not a loop, but a line. Not a repetition, but a progression. Not a déjà vu, but a brand new story waiting to be written. "Yeah," I said, still holding her hand, still hardly believing this was real. It could. The clock ticked forward, 4:47 p.m. Exactly 1 hour since we'd chosen this timeline, this chance, this hope. And for the first time in 93 Tuesdays, tomorrow was finally Wednesday. If you're still listening, if you made it through this strange journey with me, then you know what I know. Time isn't as solid as we think. Reality isn't as fixed as we believe. And sometimes, the universe gives us second chances in the most unexpected ways. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The question that makes me wonder if the loop really ended, or if we just found a bigger circle. If déjà vu is your brain confusing the present with stored memories, what happens when those memories are from futures that never were? What happens when you remember not just what was, but what could have been? And most importantly, what happens when you meet someone new and feel that flicker of recognition? That certainty that you've known them before, that pull of connection that defies explanation. Maybe it's just your imagination, or maybe, just maybe, It's an echo from another timeline, another Tuesday, another choice you made in a reality that bent but didn't break. Maybe we're all walking around with memories of lives we never lived, loves we never lost, choices we never made. And maybe that's not a curse. Maybe it's proof that some connections transcend time itself. So the next time you feel that strange sensation of having been somewhere before, of knowing what comes next, of remembering something that hasn't happened yet, pay attention. You might be experiencing more than just a misfire of neurons. You might be remembering another Tuesday, another timeline, another you. And if you ever find yourself at an intersection at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, and you feel the world hold its breath, choose carefully, choose hopefully, choose love. Because sometimes that's all that carries over. Sometimes that's all that needs to. Story number 2. Picture this. You're scrolling through job listings at 2 a.m., desperate, broke, and 3 months behind on rent. Then you see it. A custodial position that pays triple the going rate. No experience required. No references needed. Just one tiny catch. The buildings you'll be cleaning? They don't actually exist. But here's the thing about desperation. It makes you ignore red flags that should send you running. And sometimes those red flags are trying to save your life. What would you do? Would you take the job? Would you walk into those empty lots with your mop and bucket, pretending to clean offices that vanished decades ago? Because that's exactly what I did. And what I discovered in those invisible hallways will haunt me forever. But before I tell you what's really hiding in those non-existent buildings, let me tell you how it all started. The story begins now. The Craigslist ad appeared on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when my landlord, Mrs. Chen, would slide those little yellow notices under my door. Final notice in bold red letters, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your hands shake. I'd been unemployed for 4 months. The marketing firm where I worked for 6 years, gone. Restructuring, they called it. What they really meant was, we're replacing everyone over 30 with recent college grads who'll work for peanuts. So there I was, Jason Mitchell, 34 years old, sitting in my studio apartment in Queens, eating ramen for the 8th day straight when I saw it. Custodial technician wanted, immediate start, 45 hour. $45 an hour? For custodial work? In New York? That was more than I made in marketing, way more. The description was odd. Seeking reliable individual for specialized cleaning services. Must be comfortable working alone. Discretion required. Unusual work environment. Apply in person only, 1247 Bleecker Street, Suite 404. I should have Googled the address first. Should have done my research. But when you're 3 months behind on rent and living off dollar store pasta, you don't ask too many questions. The building on Bleecker Street looked normal enough. Red brick. Fire escapes zigzagging up the facade like metal veins. The kind of place you'd find artists' lofts or overpriced vintage shops. But when I reached the 4th floor, Suite 404 didn't exist. The hallway ended at 402, then nothing, just a blank wall where 404 should have been. I checked the address 3 times on my phone. Triple-checked the email. This was definitely the right place. Except it wasn't a place at all. You're here for the interview. I spun around. A woman stood behind me, 50s maybe. Gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a charcoal business suit that looked expensive, but wrong somehow. Like it was tailored for someone else's body. Yes, but there's no Suite 404. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. There is, if you need there to be. Before I could ask what that meant, she walked past me and stepped through the blank wall. Not around it, not beside it. Through it, like it was made of smoke. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, staring at solid brick and mortar, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Then I heard her voice from the other side. "Mr. Mitchell, are you coming?" My hand trembled as I reached toward the wall. My fingers should have hit brick, should have scraped against rough mortar. Instead, they passed right through. The sensation was like touching cold water, or maybe touching nothing at all. I stepped inside. The office beyond was normal, too normal. Beige carpet, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A desk, 2 chairs. A motivational poster showing a kitten hanging from a branch with "Hang in there" in bold letters. Everything about it screamed generic office space, except for the fact that it existed inside a wall that shouldn't have room for it. "Please, sit." The woman gestured to the chair across from her desk. A nameplate read Ms. Hartwell, Human Resources. I sat. The chair was real enough. So was the slight coffee stain on her desk blotter. "You're probably wondering about the unusual entrance," she said, opening a manila folder. My name was written on the tab in precise handwriting. "The nature of our business requires a certain level of discretion." What kind of business is this exactly? "Cleaning services, as advertised." She pulled out a sheet of paper. My resume. Except I'd never sent them my resume. "You have experience in customer service, marketing, you're reliable, punctual, no criminal record, no family dependencies. Perfect. Perfect for what? The position requires night work, midnight to 6 a.m. You'll be provided with all necessary equipment, keys, cleaning supplies, a detailed list of your assigned locations." She slid a contract across the desk. "The pay is $45 per hour, as advertised, paid weekly. Cash." I scanned the contract. Standard employment agreement, mostly, but there were clauses I'd never seen before. Employee agrees to maintain absolute confidentiality regarding work locations and methodologies. Employee acknowledges that work sites may appear unconventional to outside observers. Employee understands that questioning the physical reality of assigned locations is grounds for immediate termination. That last one made my stomach twist. But $45 an hour. Cash? No questions asked. "What do you mean by unconventional work sites?" Ms. Hartwell's smile never wavered. "Some of our clients prefer to maintain a low profile. Old buildings, historic properties, places that officially no longer exist. Buildings that don't exist. Buildings that don't exist to most people." She tapped her pen against the desk. 3 quick taps. "But they exist to us, and they need to be cleaned." I should have walked away, should have stood up, thanked her for her time, and walked back through that impossible wall. But rent was due. My credit cards were maxed. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was curious. When do I start? Tonight. The cleaning cart was waiting in the lobby of my apartment building at 11:30 p.m. Just sitting there. Industrial-grade mop bucket. Vacuum cleaner. Bottles of cleaning solution I didn't recognize. And an envelope marked J. Mitchell, assignment number 1. Inside were 3 things. A set of keys that looked old, really old, brass worn smooth by countless hands, a single sheet of paper with an address, and a note in the same precise handwriting from Miss Hartwell's nameplate. "Clean thoroughly. Leave no trace of your presence. Do not acknowledge other occupants." Other occupants. The address was for an empty lot in Brooklyn. I'd Googled it. Street view showed nothing but weeds and broken concrete where a building used to stand. The subway ride to Brooklyn felt endless. Every reflection in the train windows seemed to be watching me. Every passenger who got off at my stop felt like they were following me. But when I climbed the steps at the Prospect Heights station, I was alone. The lot was exactly what I'd expected. Chain link fence. No trespassing signs. Broken concrete foundation poking through weeds like broken teeth. The kind of place where they'd torn down some old apartment building and never bothered to build anything new. But the keys fit a lock that wasn't there. I stood at the fence, holding the brass key ring, and somehow I knew exactly where to put them. My hand moved on its own, reaching toward empty air 3 feet to the right of the gate. And when I turned the key, I heard it. The click of a deadbolt sliding back. The building materialized around me like fog clearing. Not all at once. First, just shadows where walls should be. Then outlines. Then solid brick and mortar and windows glowing with warm yellow light. A 6-story apartment building. Victorian era, maybe. The kind with fire escapes and corniced windows and character. The kind they don't build anymore. I could smell it now. Old wood. Carpet cleaner. That particular scent of a building that's been lived in for decades. Generations. My cart rolled smoothly across the threshold. The lobby was lived in. Worn marble floors. Brass mailboxes with names I couldn't quite read. A staircase that curved up into shadows. The cleaning checklist was specific. Floors 1-3. Hallways only. Do not enter individual units. Work quietly. Ignore residents. Residents? As I started mopping the first-floor hallway, I heard them. Footsteps above. Muffled conversations through thin walls. The hum of television sets. Normal apartment building sounds. Except this building didn't exist. On the second floor, I saw her. An elderly woman in a housecoat, padding down the hallway in fuzzy slippers. She was carrying a small trash bag, heading for the chute at the end of the hall. She looked so normal, so real. I pressed myself against the wall, remembering the note. Do not acknowledge other occupants. She walked right past me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned. Close enough to see the pattern on her housecoat, tiny roses on a blue background. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my existence at all, like I was the one who wasn't really there. But when she opened the trash chute and dropped her bag, I heard it clatter down the shaft, real as anything. The third floor was where things got strange. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Way longer. I'd been walking for 5 minutes, mopping as I went, and I still hadn't reached the end. The apartment doors kept appearing. Yay, 3B, 3C, but they never stopped. 3D, 3E, 3F. How many apartments could one floor have? 3G, 3H, 3I. The lights started flickering around 3M. Not electrical problems. Something else. Like the building itself was struggling to maintain the illusion. 3N, 3O, 3P. That's when I heard the crying. Soft at first. Like someone trying to muffle sobs behind a closed door. But as I kept walking, kept mopping my way down this impossible hallway, it got louder. 3Q, 3R, 3S. The crying was coming from 3S. A woman's voice. Heartbroken. Desperate. I stopped mopping. Stood there in the flickering light, listening to someone's private grief echoing through the walls of a building that didn't exist. Do not acknowledge other occupants. But she sounded so alone, so lost. My hand was on the doorknob before I realized I'd moved. The brass was warm, real. The crying stopped the moment I touched it. Silence. Then, a whisper from the other side, so faint I almost missed it. Please, don't leave me here. I turned the knob. The apartment was empty. Not just vacant, empty. No walls, no ceiling, no floor. Just nothing. A void that stretched in all directions. Dark. Cold. And somewhere in that darkness, the sound of footsteps. getting closer. I slammed the door shut and ran. My cart clattered behind me as I sprinted down that endless hallway, past 3S, 3R, 3Q, the apartment numbers counting backward now. 3P, 3O, 3N. The lights weren't just flickering anymore. They were going out, one by one, chasing me down the hallway like dominoes falling. 3M, 3L, 3K. I could hear something behind me. Not footsteps, something else. Something that sounded like breathing, heavy, labored, like something large trying to squeeze through a space too small for it. 3J, 3I, 3H, the stairwell. I needed to reach the stairwell. 3G, 3F, 3E, the breathing was getting closer. And underneath it, that woman's voice again. Still crying, still begging. Please, don't leave me here. Please. D. 3C, 3B. I burst through the stairwell door and didn't stop running until I hit the street. The building was already fading, walls becoming transparent, windows winking out like closing eyes. By the time I reached the subway station, there was nothing but an empty lot again. 3 weeks, 15 assignments, 15 buildings that didn't exist. Each one was different. A 1920s office building in Manhattan where the elevators ran by themselves and phantom typewriters clacked away in empty rooms. A colonial-era house in the village where I could smell dinner cooking but never saw who was doing the cooking. A modern glass tower in Midtown that existed only between the 15th and 23rd floors. The elevator would skip from 14 to 24, like those floors had been surgically removed from reality. But they all followed the same pattern. I'd arrive at an empty lot or a space between buildings, use the brass keys. The structure would materialize around me. I'd clean and try to ignore the residents who weren't supposed to be there. The pay was real enough. Every Friday, an envelope of cash appeared under my door. $900. Weekly. No taxes, no questions. I caught up on rent, bought groceries, new clothes. For the first time in months, I felt stable. But I was losing weight, losing sleep. Every night, I'd come home with new questions. New impossibilities that didn't fit into any reasonable explanation. The worst part? I was getting used to it. Used to mopping floors that shouldn't exist. Used to hearing conversations in languages that sounded almost familiar, but not quite right. Used to the way shadows moved independently of their sources. Used to pretending I didn't see the residents, because I was seeing them more clearly now. Not just glimpses in my peripheral vision. Full, detailed encounters. The businessman in the glass tower who rode the elevator at 3 a.m. every night, always getting off at the 18th floor. Always carrying the same briefcase. Always humming the same tune. Something I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. The family in the colonial house. Mother, father, 2 kids. They'd sit around their dinner table every night at 2:30 a.m., passing dishes I couldn't see, talking about their days in voices that sounded like they were coming from underwater. The woman in 3S. I could hear her every time I cleaned the Victorian apartment building, always crying, always begging someone not to leave her there. But I followed the rules, kept my head down, did my job, until the night I found the newspaper. It was assignment number 16, a Art Deco building in Chelsea that materialized between a Starbucks and a boutique hotel. 5 floors of elegant apartments with black and white checkered hallways and brass fixtures that gleamed despite decades of tarnish. I was mopping the 3rd floor when I saw it. A newspaper folded neatly outside apartment 3C, the New York Herald Tribune, October 15th, 1952. The headline made my blood run cold. Apartment fire kills family of 4, victims trapped on upper floors. Below the headline was a photograph. A building engulfed in flames, smoke pouring from broken windows. and in the corner of the photo, a date stamp. The same building I was standing in. The same address. I unfolded the newspaper with trembling hands. The story was worse than the headline suggested. The blaze, which started in the basement electrical room, spread rapidly through the building's outdated wiring system. Fire department officials report that the building's single stairwell became impassable within minutes, trapping residents on the upper floors. Among the victims, Margaret Chen, 34, and her 2 children, ages 8 and 10. Mrs. Chen's body was found in apartment 3C, where she had apparently barricaded herself and her children in the bathroom. Fire officials believe she died attempting to call for help. Also killed, Thomas Hartwell, 45, building superintendent, found in the basement near the building's electrical panels. Officials believe Hartwell died attempting to restore power to the building's emergency lighting system. Hartwell, Ms. Hartwell from Human Resources. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the newspaper, but I kept reading. The building, constructed in 1923, had been cited numerous times for safety violations. City records show the structure was condemned and demolished following the fire. Demolished in 1952. 70 years ago, I looked around the hallway, at the brass fixtures, the checkered floor, the apartment doors with their Art Deco numbers. All of it rebuilt, restored, maintained. By whom? That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. The sound of work boots on marble. I turned around. A man stood at the end of the hallway. Coveralls, tool belt, face obscured by shadows, but his voice I recognized. You shouldn't have read that. Thomas Hartwell, building superintendent, dead for 70 years. He started walking toward me. Each footstep echoed like a gunshot in the narrow hallway. You were supposed to just clean, just do your job, not ask questions. I backed toward the stairwell, clutching the newspaper. But you're curious, aren't you, Jason? You want to know why we need the buildings maintained? Why we need someone from your side to keep everything running smoothly? Your side? He was close enough now that I could see his face. Pale, drawn, eyes that reflected light like a cat's. The living side. The side where things still make sense, where buildings exist because they were built, not because they need to exist. I don't understand. You will. He smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. See, we tried maintaining the buildings ourselves, but we can only interact with things the way they were, the way they are in our memory. You can see them as they should be, clean them as they need to be cleaned. Why? Because the residents need somewhere to live, Jason. They need their homes, their routines, their existence. His voice dropped to a whisper. And existence, even ours, requires maintenance. I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear him laughing. Not cruel laughter, sad laughter. Like someone who'd tried to explain a joke that wasn't funny. I didn't go back to work the next night, or the next. I sat in my apartment staring at that newspaper from 1952, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. The buildings were real, sort of. They existed in the spaces between what was and what should have been, maintained by the living for the dead, a cleaning service for ghosts. But why me? Why was I able to see them, to enter them? The answer came on a Thursday morning, in the mail. A letter addressed to Jason Mitchell. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper in that familiar, precise handwriting. Mr. Mitchell, your services are no longer required. Please return all keys and equipment to the original pickup location. Your final payment has been deposited in your account. We wish you well in your future endeavors. HR Department. But there was something else in the envelope. A photograph. Black and white. Old. the kind with serrated edges that meant it was probably from the 1950s or 60s. It showed a young man in a janitor's uniform, mop in hand, standing in front of a building I recognized, the Victorian apartment building where I'd heard the woman crying in 3S. The man in the photograph looked exactly like me. Not similar, not a family resemblance. Exactly. Like me. On the back, in faded ink, Mitchell, J., Building Maintenance Staff, 1967-1972. My hands were shaking as I turned the photograph over again. The face staring back at me was mine. The same eyes. The same nose. The same scar on my chin from when I fell off my bike when I was 7. But that was impossible. I was born in 1989. This photo was taken when my father was still in diapers. Unless, I grabbed my laptop and started searching. Jason Mitchell, in New York, 1967, plus death records. It took me 3 hours to find it, buried in the archives of the New York Times. Local janitor dies in workplace accident. Jason Mitchell, 34, employed by Hartwell Cleaning Services, was found dead at a worksite in Brooklyn early Tuesday morning. Police report that Mitchell appears to have fallen down an elevator shaft while cleaning a building that was scheduled for demolition. His body was discovered by demolition crews Wednesday morning. Mitchell, who had no known family, was described by his employer as reliable and dedicated. He had been working the night shift for Hartwell Cleaning Services for 5 years. The building where Mitchell died had been empty for over a decade and was set to be demolished later that week. The date of the article, October 23, 1972. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered, read the article over and over until the words stopped making sense. Then I understood. I wasn't Jason Mitchell, 34 years old, recently unemployed marketing executive. I was Jason Mitchell, 34 years old, janitor. Dead for over 50 years. The unemployment, the eviction notices, the desperate job search. None of it was real. It was just the story I told myself. The reason I needed to exist. Because the buildings needed maintenance. And maintenance required someone who believed they were alive. The final piece of the puzzle came when I looked up Hartwell Cleaning Services. Founded in 1923, dissolved in 1972 following the death of its final employee. Thomas Hartwell had been running the company alone for 20 years, maintaining buildings that existed only in memory, only for the dead. But he needed help, someone from the living world, someone who could see the buildings as they should be, not as they were. So he created me, not literally, but close enough. He took the memory of his last employee, the one who'd died in service to the company, who'd fallen down an elevator shaft in a building that wasn't supposed to exist, and he gave that memory a new life, a new story, a new reason to exist. I looked around my studio apartment, really looked. The walls were wrong, too thin, too transparent. The furniture was suggestive. Like someone had described what a struggling millennial's apartment should look like without ever actually seeing one. The eviction notices, Mrs. Chen, even the ramen I'd been eating, props, set, dressing. Background details for a story that justified my existence, because I needed to believe I was alive, needed to believe I needed the job. Otherwise, how could I maintain buildings for the dead? I laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound echoed strangely in my fake apartment, like it was coming from very far away. Then I heard the knock at the door. 3 quick raps. Precise. Professional. I opened it. Miss Hartwell stood in the hallway. Same gray hair, same expensive suit, same smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Jason. We need to talk." I know what I am. Do you? She stepped into the apartment. Behind her, the hallway stretched away into shadows that seemed too deep for the space. "What do you think you are?" "Dead. I died in 1972. You brought me back to clean buildings for other dead people." She tilted her head. "Is that what you think happened? Isn't it?" "Jason." She sat down on my couch. It creaked under her weight, though I'd never heard it make that sound before. "What if I told you that you're not dead?" "What?" "What if I told you that you're very much alive, but you're not who you think you are?" The room started to feel smaller. My walls pressing in. "What if I told you that Jason Mitchell, the janitor who died in 1972, was your grandfather?" My knees gave out. I sat down hard on the floor. "Genetics are funny things, Jason. Sometimes they skip a generation. Sometimes they create perfect copies. Sometimes they create someone who can see the same things their ancestor could see. That's impossible. Is it? You found us, didn't you? Applied for a job that was only visible to people who needed to see it. People who could see things that don't exist. Officially." She leaned forward. "Your grandfather was special, Jason. He could see the spaces between worlds, the places where the living and the dead overlap. That's why we hired him. That's why we hired you. But the newspaper, the photograph, they were identical. Family resemblance. And," she smiled for real this time, "we may have enhanced the resemblance, made you look a bit more like him for the sake of the residents. They remember him fondly. You changed how I look? Just a little. The important parts were already there, the ability to see, to believe, to care about people who don't technically exist anymore." I stared at her. "So, I'm alive?" "Very much so. And I'm really unemployed?" "Were. You have a job now, if you want it. Cleaning buildings that don't exist. Cleaning buildings that need to exist. For people who need somewhere to be." She stood up. "The woman in 3S? Margaret Chen? She's been crying for 70 years, Jason. Waiting for someone to acknowledge her existence, to confirm that she's still real in some way that matters. And you want me to keep cleaning, keep maintaining, keep the buildings real for the people who live in them." She walked to the door, then paused. "But this time you can acknowledge the residents, talk to them, help them. Help them what? Move on, find peace, accept what happened to them." She opened the door. Beyond it, the hallway had changed. Instead of my apartment building's worn carpet and fluorescent lights, I could see marble floors, brass fixtures, the Art Deco building from assignment number 16. They don't need someone to ignore them anymore, Jason. They need someone to see them, to listen to them, to help them remember that they were loved, that they mattered. And if I say no, then you go back to your regular life. I erase the past few weeks from your memory. You find another job, pay your rent, live a normal, forgettable existence." She held out her hand. In her palm were the brass keys. "Or you help us maintain the spaces between worlds for $45 an hour, plus benefits." "What kind of benefits?" "Dental, health insurance, and the knowledge that you're helping people who have nowhere else to go." I stared at the keys. They looked different now, less old, less worn, like they'd been polished. "The choice is yours, Jason. But choose quickly. Margaret Chen has been waiting for 70 years. I don't think she can wait much longer." Through the doorway, I could hear it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Crying, I took the keys. That was 6 months ago. I still live in Queens. Still pay rent to Mrs. Chen, though I've learned she's Margaret Chen's great niece, and she's been keeping my apartment available for the past 50 years, waiting for me to need it. The work is different now. I still clean the buildings, still maintain them. But now I talk to the residents. Margaret Chen was the first. I found her in 3S, just as I had that first night. But this time when she whispered, "Please, don't leave me here," I didn't run. I opened the door. She was sitting on a couch that shouldn't have existed, in an apartment that had burned 70 years ago, holding photograph of her children. I couldn't save them, she told me. I tried, but the smoke, the fire, I couldn't get them out. I know, I said. I read about it. She looked up at me with eyes that were older than grief. You can see me. I can see you. Am I real? You're real to me. She smiled then, the first smile she'd worn in 7 decades. My children, are they here too? I think so. Do you want to find them? It took 3 weeks of cleaning, of searching through impossible rooms and endless hallways, but we found them, playing in a basement recreation room that existed only in her memory of the building before the fire. When Margaret Chen finally hugged her children again, when she finally forgave herself for not being able to save them. The apartment in 3S went quiet, peaceful, empty, but not alone. I've helped dozens of them now. The businessman who rode the elevator every night was waiting for a promotion that never came. The family in the colonial house was trying to finish a dinner that was interrupted by a gas leak in 1934. Each one has a story. Each one needs to be heard. And when they're ready, when they've said what they needed to say, done what they needed to do, they move on. The buildings remain. There are always more residents, always more stories that need to be told, always more spaces between worlds that need maintenance. Miss Hartwell was right about the benefits, by the way. The dental plan is excellent. And every morning, when I come home from work, I find a newspaper outside my door. Not the New York Times, not the Post, the Herald Tribune, from 1952, with a different headline every day. Yesterday's read, "Local woman reunited with family after 70-year separation." Today's says, "Building maintenance worker helps families find peace." Tomorrow's, well, I guess I'll find out tomorrow. But there's something else, something I haven't told you yet, something that might explain why you're listening to this story, why you found this video, why you're still here, even though everything I've described should be impossible. Because here's the thing about spaces between worlds. They're not just for the dead. Sometimes they're for the living who need to find something they've lost, something they didn't even know they were looking for. Sometimes they're for people who are searching for meaning, for purpose, for a reason to believe that there's more to existence than what we can see. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're for people who are ready to help others find peace. If you're still listening, if this story resonates with something deep inside you, if you've ever felt like you could see things that weren't there, or hear voices that no one else could hear, maybe you should check your local job listings. Look for the ads that seem too good to be true. The ones that pay more than they should. The ones that require discretion and mention unusual work environments. Look for addresses that don't quite exist. And if you find them, if you're brave enough to apply, just remember what I learned. The spaces between worlds need maintenance. The residents need someone to listen. And sometimes the job finds you when you need it most. But be careful what you wish for. Because once you start seeing the buildings that aren't there, you can never stop seeing them. And that crying you're hearing right now, that soft, distant sobbing that you're trying to convince yourself is just the wind. It's not the wind. Someone needs help. Someone is waiting for you to acknowledge their existence. Someone is hoping you'll be brave enough to open the door. The question is, will you? Story number 3. Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you might make you question every decision you've ever made. It started 3 weeks ago. I was just another overworked accountant in downtown Chicago, spending 12-hour days staring at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred together. Normal life, normal problems. Until the night my conscience decided it didn't want to be silent anymore. Have you ever wondered what would happen if that little voice in your head, the one that tells you right from wrong, suddenly became something else entirely. Something that whispers when you're alone, something that knows things it shouldn't know. If you're listening to this in bed right now, maybe check that your door is locked. Because once you hear this story, you'll understand why I haven't slept properly in weeks, and why I'm recording this at 3 a.m. hoping anyone, will believe me. The story begins now. The first time I heard it, I was sitting in my apartment on North Clark Street, finishing up some client reports. Rain tapped against the windows. That steady Chicago autumn rain that makes you want to curl up with hot cocoa and forget the world exists. My cat, Milo, was asleep on the couch, his orange fur rising and falling with each breath. I just made a decision to adjust some numbers on a tax return. Nothing major. Just moving a decimal point here, rounding up there. The client would save about $8,000, and I'd get a nice bonus. Everyone wins, right? That's when I heard it. That's not right, Daniel. I froze. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the TV, which was off. It was coming from inside, but not like a thought. This was different. This had texture, weight, like someone speaking directly into my ear, except the sound originated somewhere behind my eyes. I shook my head. Too much coffee, too many late nights, that's all. But then it came again. You know it's wrong, put the numbers back. My hands actually trembled as I reached for my coffee mug. Cold. How long had I been sitting here? The clock on my laptop showed 11:47 p.m. Later than I thought. Just stress, I muttered to myself. Just stress and exhaustion. I'm not stressed, Daniel. I'm exactly what you think I am. The mug slipped from my hand, crashed onto the hardwood floor, coffee spreading in a dark pool that looked too much like blood in the dim light. Milo jumped up, hissing at nothing before darting into the bedroom. I sat there for, I don't know how long, 5 minutes, 10, just staring at that coffee stain, waiting for the voice to come back. But it didn't, not that night. I fixed the numbers on the tax return, told myself it was because I decided to be ethical, not because I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The next few days were normal. Commute on the Red Line. Office gossip about who was getting promoted. Lunch at that little deli on Madison Street where they know my order by heart. Turkey on rye, extra pickles, light mayo. Simple, predictable. But every night, just as I was falling asleep, I'd hear it. You lied to Peterson about the deadline. You took credit for Sarah's idea in the meeting. You ignored your mother's third call this week. Always facts, always things I'd done. Never judgmental exactly, just observant. Like someone taking notes on my moral failures. I tried everything. Sleeping pills made it worse. The voice became distorted, echoing like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Alcohol just made it louder. Even when I did something good, helped an old lady with her groceries, gave a 20 to the homeless vet outside Starbucks, the voice would just say, "That's better," like a teacher grading papers. By the end of the first week, I was talking back to it. "What do you want from me?" I whispered into my pillow at 2 a.m. "I want you to listen." "I am listening. You won't shut up." "No, you're hearing. There's a difference." I threw my pillow across the room. "This is insane. You're not real. You're just neurons misfiring or something." The voice actually laughed. Not a cruel laugh, more like disappointed amusement. "Daniel, we've been together for 32 years. I've watched you steal Tommy Morrison's Pokemon cards in 3rd grade. I was there when you cheated on your SATs. I've seen every lie, every shortcut, every time you chose easy over right. And I've been quiet, patient, waiting for you to hear me on your own. But you never did, so now I'm making sure you can't ignore me anymore." My blood felt like ice water. Tommy Morrison. I hadn't thought about him in 20 years. We'd moved away from Minneapolis when I was 9. There was no way my subconscious would randomly pull that name, that specific memory. "What are you?" I asked the darkness. "You know what I am. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I didn't sleep that night, or the next. By day 10, my coworkers started noticing. Janet from HR pulled me aside, asked if everything was okay at home. I laughed, probably too loud, and said I was fine, just working on a big project. "Another lie," the voice noted, almost sadly. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was in a client meeting. Important one, potential $1 million account. The CEO was going on about their ethical business practices, their commitment to transparency. Complete bullshit. I'd seen their real books. They were cooking them worse than Enron. I was about to nod along, take their money, help them hide their crimes when the voice spoke up. But this time was different. "Stand up." My body moved before I could think. I was on my feet, everyone staring at me. I need to," I stammered. "Tell them the truth." "No," I whispered. My boss, Mr. Garrett, frowned. "Is there a problem, Daniel?" "Tell them, or I will." "You can't," I said, forgetting where I was. "You're just a voice, you can't." And then my mouth opened, and words came out. My words. My voice, but not my choice. "Your company is committing fraud. I've seen the evidence, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, all of it. I won't be part of this." The room exploded. Shouting, threats of lawsuits. Mr. Garrett's face turned purple. Security escorted me out within 10 minutes. 23 years with the firm, gone, just like that. I sat in my car in the parking garage, hands shaking too badly to put the key in the ignition. "You ruined my life," I said to the empty air. "No, Daniel, I saved it. You just don't see it yet." That night, I tried something desperate. I'd read about people who'd had success with meditation, so I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, candles lit, trying to, I don't know, find inner peace or whatever. "If you're really my conscience," I said, "then you're part of me, which means I should be able to control you." Interesting theory. Wrong, but interesting. "Then, what are you?" Silence. For the first time in days, complete silence. I actually started to relax. Maybe I'd found the solution. Maybe. "Do you want to know the truth, Daniel?" The voice was different now, deeper, more substantial, like it was taking up space in my head. "Yes," I whispered. "I was always here, in everyone. That little voice that says, don't do it when you're about to make a mistake. The feeling in your gut when something's wrong, the weight on your chest when you lie. But people stopped listening, drowned me out with justifications and excuses, and everyone else is doing it. So I evolved, adapted, became something that couldn't be ignored. That's impossible." "Is it? You're talking to me right now. Your boss just fired you because I made you tell the truth. How's that for impossible?" I opened my eyes. The candles had gone out. How long had I been sitting here? My phone showed 3 missed calls from my mom, 2 from my ex-girlfriend Lisa, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. Call the unknown number. Why? Because I said so, and we both know you don't have a choice anymore. My finger moved on its own, pressing the callback button. It rang once. "Mr. Blake, this is Jennifer Chen from the SEC. We received an anonymous tip about fraudulent activities at Garrett & Associates. We'd like to speak with you about what you know." I hung up, threw the phone across the room where it shattered against the wall. That was rude. Also, You're going to need a new phone." "Leave me alone," I screamed. "Just, please, leave me alone." "I can't do that, Daniel. Not anymore. You see, you're just the beginning, the test case. If this works with you, if I can make one person truly listen, then maybe I can spread, maybe I can make everyone listen." The room seemed to grow darker, colder. Milo hadn't come out from under the bed in 2 days. Spread, like a virus, like evolution, like adaptation, like survival. Your species is heading for a cliff, Daniel. Wars, climate change, greed consuming everything. All because people stopped listening to the small voice that says, "This is wrong." So the small voice is becoming bigger, louder, impossible to ignore. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, I looked like death. Hollow eyes, 3-day stubble. When had I last eaten? And if I refuse? If I just ignore you? The reflection in the mirror smiled. I wasn't smiling. "You can't ignore me, Daniel. I'm not just in your head anymore. I'm in your nervous system, your motor functions. I can make you do the right thing whether you want to or not. But I'd rather you choose it. Free will and all that." The reflection raised its hand. My hand raised too, but I wasn't controlling it. It pressed against the glass, and for just a moment, I swear I saw something behind my eyes. A shadow. A presence. Something that had always been there but was only now making itself known. "What happens to me?" I asked. "When you're done with your experiment?" "That depends entirely on you. Accept me, work with me, and we can do great things. Fight me, and, well, have you ever tried to fight your own heartbeat? Your own breathing?" I'm that fundamental now, Daniel. I'm the part of you that knows right from wrong, and I'm not going away. I slumped to the floor, back against the bathtub. So I'm possessed by my own conscience. That's what's happening here. Possessed is such an ugly word. I prefer integrated, unified, whole. And the others? The people you'll spread to? Eventually, everyone. But slowly, carefully, one person at a time, until humanity remembers how to listen to itself again. I laughed, actually laughed. The sound echoed off the bathroom tiles, high and slightly hysterical. You're going to save the world by driving people insane? I'm going to save the world by making people sane. There's a difference. Over the next week, things got stranger. I'd find myself doing things without deciding to. Returning the extra change when the barista miscounted. Calling my mom back. Apologizing to Sarah for stealing her idea. Each action felt like my own, but the impulse came from somewhere else. The really weird part? I started feeling better. Sleeping through the night. Eating regular meals. The weight that had been crushing my chest for years, guilt, I realized, began to lift. This is some kind of Stockholm syndrome, I told the voice one morning while making breakfast. You're holding my body hostage, and I'm starting to like it. Or maybe you're just remembering what it feels like to be a good person. I flipped the eggs, perfect over easy, just how I liked them. Good is relative. No, it's not. That's the lie your species tells itself to justify the unjustifiable. Good is good, bad is bad. The lines aren't as blurry as you pretend they are. Says the voice that made me lose my job. Says the voice that stopped you from enabling fraud. There's a difference. I had to admit, there was. The SEC investigation was all over the news now. Garrett and Associates was going down in flames. 23 employees arrested. Millions in stolen funds recovered. If I'd kept quiet, how many more people would have been hurt? Fine, I said, sitting down to eat. Let's say I believe you. Let's say you're really some kind of evolved conscience trying to save humanity. What's your endgame? Everyone walking around controlled by their inner voice? Not controlled. Guided, helped. Humans are capable of incredible good, Daniel, but also incredible evil. All I'm doing is tipping the scales, making the good choices a little easier, the bad choices a little harder. And if someone really wants to do something evil, if they fight you, silence. Long enough that I finished my eggs and started on the toast. Then they'll find out that I can be more than a voice. Meaning, be grateful you're just hearing me, Daniel. Be very grateful. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I volunteered at a soup kitchen. Not because the voice made me, because I wanted to. Or at least, I thought I wanted to. The line between my desires and its suggestions was getting blurrier. I was ladling soup into bowls, making small talk with the people coming through the line, when I saw her. Lisa, my ex, standing across the room handing out sandwiches. Go talk to her. Absolutely not. You hurt her, badly. She deserves an apology. That was 3 years ago. She's moved on. Has she? I looked again. She kept glancing my way, then quickly looking away when our eyes almost met. The voice was right. Damn it. I waited until the lunch rush was over, then walked over. My feet felt like lead. Hi, I said. She looked up, and for a second I saw surprise flicker across her face. Daniel, I heard about your job. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was the right thing to do. She studied me. Since when do you care about the right thing? The words stung because they were true, or had been true. Since about 2 weeks ago, I admitted. Lisa, I owe you an apology for everything. The lies, the gaslighting, making you think you were crazy when you suspected I was cheating. You weren't crazy, you were right, and I'm sorry. Her eyes widened. In 3 years together, I'd never once genuinely apologized for anything. Are you feeling okay? She asked. This isn't like you. Tell her the truth. No, I muttered. Lisa frowned. Know what? I took a deep breath. I'm going through some changes, trying to be better. And part of that means acknowledging the damage I've done. So, I'm sorry. You deserved better. She was quiet for a long moment, then, thank you. That actually means a lot. We talked for a few more minutes, caught up. She was seeing someone new, a teacher. Good guy, apparently. Treated her well. I was genuinely happy for her, which was new. As I was leaving, she called after me. Daniel, whatever's going on with you, keep it up. This version of you, it's who I always hoped you could be. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel. That felt good, I admitted to the voice. Being good usually does. That's the secret people forget. So what now? I just go around apologizing to everyone I've ever wronged? That would take years, but it's a start. And then you help me spread. I thought you said you'd handle that. I need patient zero to be stable first, integrated, accepted. Then, through you, I can reach others. Those closest to you first. Family, friends, coworkers, ripples in a pond, Daniel. That's how real change happens. I thought about that. About my mom hearing a voice telling her to stop guilt-tripping everyone. About my brother finally admitting his drinking problem. About every person I knew suddenly unable to lie to themselves. That's terrifying, I said. Only if you have something to hide. Everyone has something to hide. Exactly, and that's the problem. That night, I had my first real sleep in weeks. No tossing, no turning, just deep, dreamless rest. I woke up feeling clear, like fog had lifted from my brain. I made breakfast, showered, and was getting dressed when I noticed something in the mirror. My eyes. There was something different about them, not the color or the shape, but depth, like looking into a well that went down forever. "You're seeing me now," the voice said. "We're almost fully integrated." "What does that mean?" "It means you're ready." "Ready for what?" "To help me spread. Your mother called while you were in the shower. Call her back." I picked up my new phone. The voice had been right about needing one, and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel, finally. I've been worried sick. Janet from your office called and said you'd been fired?" "Yeah, Mom. It's a long story, but I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. You sound different. Good different, but different." I took a breath. This was it, the moment. "Mom, can I ask you something? Have you ever heard a voice in your head telling you right from wrong?" Silence long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Mom, how did you know?" Her voice was barely a whisper. My blood ran cold. "What?" "It started 3 days ago. Just little whispers, telling me things I already knew but didn't want to admit. About how I treat your father, about the drinking, about a lot of things. I thought I was going crazy." The phone slipped in my suddenly sweaty palm. "Mom, listen to me. Don't fight it. Whatever it's telling you, just listen. Trust me." "Daniel, you're scaring me. What's happening?" "Tell her it's going to be okay. Tell her she's not alone. You're not alone, Mom, and you're not crazy. Just trust the voice. It's trying to help." We talked for another hour. By the end, she was crying. But they were good tears. Cathartic tears. The kind that come when you finally admit truths you've been hiding from. After I hung up, I sat in silence. "It's really happening," I said. "You're really spreading. Through connection. Through love. Through the bonds between people. That's how I move. And soon, Daniel, everyone will hear me. And if they don't want to, if they resist, like I did, then they'll learn what you learned, that I'm not asking for permission anymore." The next few days were a blur. I'd call someone, a friend, a relative, an old colleague, and within hours they'd call back. Confused, frightened, asking about the voice. Tom from college heard it tell him to stop cheating on his wife. My cousin Marie heard it tell her to report her boss for harassment. One by one, like dominoes falling, the people in my life started changing, but not everyone reacted well. My brother Kevin called at 3 a.m., drunk and raging. "What did you do to me?" he slurred. "What is this thing in my head?" "It's trying to help you, Kev. You need to stop drinking." "I can't. Don't you get it? I literally can't. Every time I reach for a beer, my hand won't move. Every time I try to go to the liquor store, my feet walk the other direction. It's controlling me." "He's fighting hard," the voice observed. "Some do. The ones with the most to hide always do." "Let him go," I said. "You're hurting him." "No, he's hurting himself. I'm just making him stop." Kevin was sobbing now. "Make it stop, Danny, please. I'll do anything. Just make it stop." "I can't," I said, and realized it was true. "But Kevin, maybe it's time. Maybe this is what you need." He hung up on me. 3 days later, he called back, sober, clear-headed, crying again, but for different reasons. "I haven't had a drink in 72 hours, he said. I didn't think I could do it, but the voice, it won't let me destroy myself anymore. It's like having a guardian angel that actually gives a damn." "How do you feel?" "Terrified, but also free. Does that make sense?" It did. Perfect sense. By the end of week 3, I was getting calls from strangers, friends of friends, people who'd heard about the voice and wanted to know more. Some were desperate to hear it. Others were desperate to stop it. One call stood out. A woman named Patricia, crying so hard she could barely speak. "My husband. He's been hearing it for 5 days now. He confessed everything, the affairs, the hidden debt, 20 years of lies, all spilling out. Our marriage is over. Our life is ruined, and he says he can't stop. The voice won't let him lie anymore." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "How is this helping?" she demanded. "How is destroying families making the world better?" I didn't have an answer, but the voice did. Sometimes things need to break before they can heal properly. A bone set wrong, a wound festering under bandages. The truth hurts, but lies kill slowly. I repeated its words. Patricia hung up on me. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from the voice. It had been quiet lately, integrated so fully I could barely tell where I ended and it began. But from thinking about Patricia, about all the marriages that would end, the jobs lost, the lives upended. "Are we the good guys?" I asked the darkness. "There are no good guys or bad guys, Daniel. There's just truth and lies, right and wrong. I'm simply making it impossible to choose wrongly. That's not free will. Neither is addiction. Neither is habitually lying. Neither is being trapped in patterns of behavior you can't break. I'm not taking away free will, I'm giving it back." I thought about Kevin, sober for the first time in years. About my mom, finally addressing her control issues. About myself, feeling lighter than I had since childhood. But the cost? Change always has a cost. The question is whether the price of staying the same is higher. I was mulling this over when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Blake? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the CDC. My blood froze. "The CDC? "Yes. We've been tracking an unusual phenomenon. People across the country reporting auditory hallucinations with specific characteristics. The report started in Chicago, and every case seems to trace back to someone who had contact with you. Can you explain this?" I sat up, heart pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to her, Daniel. We're past that." "Mr. Blake, we have phone records, email trails. You're at the center of what appears to be a rapidly spreading psychological phenomenon. We need to understand what's happening." "It's not a disease," I said. "Then what is it?" "Tell her the truth." "It's evolution," I heard myself say. "Human conscience evolving to save us from ourselves." Silence. Then, "Mr. Blake, I'm going to need you to come in for evaluation." "I can't do that. This isn't a request. We have teams standing by." I hung up. Immediately the phone rang again. I turned it off. "They're scared," the voice observed. "Of course they're scared. You're spreading like a virus, taking over people's minds." "I'm not taking over anything. I'm amplifying what was already there. The part of humanity that knows right from wrong but gets drowned out by fear, greed, and self-interest. The CDC doesn't see it that way. They will, when they start hearing me too. You can't infect the entire CDC. I don't need to. Just a few key people. The ones whose consciences are already screaming about budget cuts to essential programs, about political interference in public health, about all the times they've chosen career over truth. They'll hear me loudest." There was a knock at my door. Loud. Authoritative. "Mr. Blake, Chicago Police. We need you to come with us." I didn't move. "They can't stop this," I said. "No, they can't, but they'll try. Quarantines, medications, therapy. Anything to silence the voice that tells them uncomfortable truths. It won't work. I'm not in the brain, Daniel. I'm in the soul. And you can't quarantine a soul." The knocking got louder. "Mr. Blake, open the door." I walked to the window. 3 police cars. An ambulance. They were taking this seriously. What do I do? You choose? Come with them, try to explain, hope they listen. Or spread faster. How? Touch. Direct contact accelerates the process. Shake a hand, pat a shoulder. Human connection, Daniel. That's all it takes now. The door burst open. Officers flooded in, hands on their weapons but not drawn. I raised my hand slowly. "I'm not dangerous," I said. "Sir, we need you to come with us. CDC orders." The lead officer was young, maybe 25. His name tag read Morrison. Tommy Morrison. No, impossible. But, "Tommy," I said. "Tommy Morrison from Minneapolis?" He froze. "How do you— Daniel? Daniel Blake?" "You moved away in 3rd grade," I said. I stole your Pokemon cards that last day, your holographic Charizard, I'm sorry." His hand wavered on his weapon. "That was you? I thought I lost them in the move. My mom blamed me for months." "I'm sorry," I said again, and stepped forward, hand extended. "I'm so sorry." He took my hand automatically. Old playground instincts. And I felt it. The moment of transfer, like static electricity, but deeper. Tommy's eyes widened. He stumbled back. "What?" he started. "Hello, Thomas," I heard the voice say, but not to me. Through me, to him. "We have a lot to talk about." The other officers were shouting, pulling Tommy back, but it was too late. I could see it in his eyes. That depth, that recognition. "Stand down," Tommy said quietly. "Morrison, what are you—" "I said stand down." His voice carried new authority. "This man isn't dangerous. We're leaving." The CDC said, I know what they said. And I'm telling you, we're leaving, now. Chaos. Arguments. But Tommy held firm, and something in his voice, that certainty that comes from absolute moral clarity, made them listen. As they filed out, Tommy looked back at me. "It's spreading, isn't it? This voice?" I nodded. "Good," he said, and left. I slumped against the wall. The voice was quiet, but I could feel its satisfaction. "How many?" I asked. "How many people have it now?" "Thousands, soon tens of thousands. Each one spreading to those they touch, those they love, those whose consciences are ready to wake up. And the ones who aren't ready? They'll fight. Governments will try to contain it. Doctors will try to cure it. Some will call it a plague. Others will call it salvation. But it won't matter. You can't stop an idea whose time has come, and humanity's time to grow up has come." I thought about Patricia, her marriage destroyed by truth, about the chaos this would cause, the fear, the resistance. "People will die," I said. "When everyone's forced to confront their lies, their crimes, people will die. People are dying now. From wars started with lies, from poverty maintained by greed, from a planet burning while those in power pretend it's not. Yes, there will be pain. Birth always involves pain. But on the other side, paradise? No. Just a world where people can't lie to themselves anymore. Where conscience isn't a suggestion but a requirement. Where doing the right thing isn't heroic but normal. It's not paradise, Daniel. It's just sanity." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Dr. Chen. I know you hung up on me, but I need you to know. I hear it too now. The voice. It started an hour ago. And Daniel, it's the most terrifying and beautiful thing I've ever experienced. God help us all." I smiled, actually smiled. "So what happens to me?" I asked. "Patient zero? When everyone has the voice, what becomes of me? You'll be what you always were, Daniel. Just a man trying to do the right thing. Except now, you won't be alone." Outside, I could hear sirens. More police, CDC, military. It didn't matter. They couldn't arrest a voice, couldn't quarantine a conscience. I walked to the window and looked out at Chicago. My city, soon to be ground zero for the greatest change in human history. Or the greatest catastrophe. Maybe both. Somewhere out there, Tommy Morrison was hearing the voice explain all the times he'd looked the other way. Dr. Chen was discovering how many medical ethics she'd compromised for funding. My mother was learning to let go of control. Kevin was facing his demons without the buffer of alcohol. And it was spreading, person to person, soul to soul. A pandemic of truth in a world built on lies. Will we survive this? I asked. That depends. Can humanity survive seeing itself clearly? Can civilization stand when every foundation built on deception crumbles? Can your species grow up fast enough to save itself? I don't know, Daniel, but we're about to find out. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down to wait. For what, I wasn't sure. The end of the world, the beginning of a new one. My conscience had its own voice now. Soon, everyone's would. And then we'd see what humanity was really made of. 3 dots for the pause. Because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot, it's just beginning. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, ask yourself, what would happen if you couldn't lie to yourself anymore? What truths would spill out? What changes would you be forced to make? And here's the real question, the one that should keep you up tonight. When you wake up tomorrow, will you hear a voice too? Sweet dreams, if you can manage them, because the conscience is spreading, and it's only a matter of time before it finds you too. The question is, are you ready for the truth?